Hello, today we're going through climate change in IB biology. This topic will always be a bit funny to me, not because climate change is funny, but because I still remember when one of my students told me that he didn't believe in climate change and thus didn't want to review this topic. So, if any of you don't believe in climate change, that's fine, but I highly recommend you still look at this topic because it might be in the papers. Let's get started. And I think this is a relatively easy topic to understand as well. So, let's start by looking at greenhouse gases. So, human activity has increased the atmospheric concentrations of two main greenhouse gases. That's methane, CH4, and carbon dioxide, CO2. Now, these gases trap long-wave radiation emitted by the Earth. Basically, it comes from the sun first, it gets reflected off of the Earth, and then it gets trapped by these gases. And that's what we call global warming. Basically, the heat is retained in the atmosphere. So CO2 mainly gets released from burning fossil fuels, and methane from extracting fossil fuels, and also human sources like landfills. Even though these gases make up less than 1% of the atmosphere, they significantly affect the climate. Just so you know, other gases such as water vapor also contribute to this a lot. However, they are not produced by human activity, so that's why we're not mentioning them here. All right, next thing, positive feedback. We've looked at positive feedback a lot in other topics, but positive feedback also affects to global warming. It's that feedback loop that self-amplifies. So let's look at two main examples. The first one, which you can see here, is when ice melts, the surfaces become darker because obviously ice is wider, it's lighter than the actual sea, right? Darker surfaces absorb more heat, and this leads to even more melting of ice, right? So it's a vicious circle. It increases more and more every single time. There's plenty more examples, but another one we're going to look at is forest fires. So when you have increased heat, there's more droughts, there's less humidity, there's more fires. Fires emit more CO2, and also because you're reducing the amount of forest, of trees, you also reduce carbon capture because remember, trees capture carbon from the atmosphere. So this leads to even more heat and therefore more fires, and so on and so on. The cycle intensifies. Okay. Tipping points. We looked at this in 4.2 briefly, but basically tipping points is when one ecosystem gets converted from one stable form to another. So a great example of this is forest fires. If you have too much forest fire, again, what's going to happen is the trees are going to start taking in less CO2 because there's less trees, right? And remember, CO2 is taken in during photosynthesis, but also we're going to burn and release a lot of CO2 during the actual fire. So we could go into a tipping point where actually the forest goes from being a carbon sink, meaning it takes up carbon, to a carbon source, meaning it releases more carbon than it takes in. That is the perfect example of a tipping point. Another consequence, habitat change. So with the ice melting, that's going to affect a lot of species. For example, emperor penguins, which depend on the ice for breeding, and also walruses. They use the ice for birthing and for resting. So if there's a loss of ice, that forces them onto land where the pups are at higher risk, and also it forces them to have longer swimming trips, right, which reduces efficiency and increases energy loss. So very, very dangerous to take away the habitat or degrade it. Okay, this is often a cause of confusion for a lot of students. So let's go through this slowly. The upwelling, the nutrient upwelling. Okay. To understand this, you need to know that just naturally, okay, in the ocean, the top layers are warmer because the sun is hitting them, and they're also more fresh water because salt tends to go to the bottom, precipitation, right? That happens also in a glass of water, but this is at a bigger scale. And the bottom layers are colder and also salty. But what does climate change have to do with this? Basically, as the global temperatures rise, the surface of the ocean becomes even warmer and less salty, right? Why? Because there's a melting ice above, which makes it more fresh, and there's more heat, so it becomes warmer. What this means is that this stratification, right, this separation, becomes even stronger. And when that happens, there's less vertical mixing, which means that the water from the bottom, which normally goes up, that's what's called upwelling. So that happens naturally. The water at the bottom upwells to the top, and the water at the bottom has a lot of nutrients. But now with climate change, if we're having a bigger difference, there's less upwelling, meaning all of this nutrient-rich water struggles to reach the surface. And that's very important because on the surface is where there's tons of plants. So if there's no nutrients, there's no photosynthesis. And if there's no photosynthesis, you start to lose the ecosystem, the waters absorb less CO2, and it leads to tons of other second and third order consequences. I hope that makes sense. Another consequence. Global warming causes many species to shift their ranges poleward, meaning to the poles, and upslope, meaning up in altitude. So, for example, a lot of butterflies have been shifting throughout the 20th century up to 240 kilometers north, right? So if they used to be in Spain, now they might have to be in France. That's just a dumb example, but just to explain what poleward means. And then upslope means that species like New Guinea birds are moving upwards. But in this case, we're not talking geographically, we're talking up, literally up, right? Like to higher places, higher habitats, so mountains, for example. All of this, again, risks extinction, because if these species are having less and less habitats to live in, eventually they might have none. Okay, next thing. Again, this also causes confusion, so let's go through it slowly. Coral reefs. This is what confuses most people. How does higher CO2 lead to higher acidification? So those of you who don't take chemistry, this might be a bit more complicated, but basically when you increase the CO2 in a solution, the water becomes more acidic. It releases more H protons, right? Which is a lower pH. The problem with this is that it also reduces the availability of the carbonate ion. And the carbonate ion is very important for calcification. Calcification is a process that corals go through. They need it for their skeletons. So if we don't have carbonate ion, because of this acidification, the corals are much, much weaker and can even dissolve. On top of this, the higher temperatures lead to coral bleaching, which just refers to the corals normally have tons of algae like on top of them, right? And they're symbiotic. So they die because of this higher temperature, leading to what we call bleaching. It's the loss of those algae, and therefore they lose their color and also vital nutrients. The big issue is corals are keystone species. We looked at that in the previous topic, meaning they are vital to the ecosystem. So them being degraded might lead to ecosystem collapse, which is very, very dangerous. Next thing, this is super easy, carbon sequestration. So carbon sequestration is the idea of storing atmospheric CO2 through natural processes. So strategies include afforestation, which is planting trees in previously non-forested areas, forest regeneration, which is replanting trees after deforestation, and peatland restoration, which is reviving waterlogged ecosystems, because these waterlogged ecosystems, peatlands, they store large amounts of carbon. So basically, it's just trying to undo human harm. All right, that's everything for SL, but if you're in HL, stick around for a little longer. We don't have much to go through, don't worry. So this is kind of a stupid slide, I'm not going to lie. And don't worry too much about it. Phenology, just so you know, phenology is studying seasonal biological events such as flowering, migration, etc. And these events are going to be disrupted by climate change. A great example is the reindeer, which migrate based on the photoperiod of their food plants, right? So basically when the plants are there. But what's happening now is their food plants, the ones they eat, are now emerging earlier because of higher temperatures, creating a mismatch that reduces the successive feeding of the reindeer. Okay. Another thing regarding life cycles. So warmer temperatures can also accelerate insect development. So for example, this type of beetle, called the spruce bark beetle, normally takes 2 years per life cycle. But warming, like global warming, can actually shorten this to 1 year. And what happens is this synchronizes beetle emergence, leading to mass attacks on stressed trees. And that can cause widespread forest damage. Basically, the whole idea here, okay, these are very niche examples. It's just that climate change is disrupting everything, and it has a lot more effects than you would initially think. Like the Earth warming is not only that it's a bit hotter when you go to the beach, right? It has tons of unforeseen events, and even more that we're not even predicting yet. Okay, and the last thing is that climate change can actually drive evolutionary shifts by basically altering the fitness of specific traits. If you remember when we looked at fitness depends completely on the environment, right? A polar bear does not have the same fitness in the North Pole than in Mallorca in Spain, obviously, right? So if climate change changes the environment, then that will also change what traits provide fitness. So for example, in this type of owl called the tawny owl, what's been happening is the tawny owl has been shifting from this gray color to this brown color. Why? Because there's warmer winters now in Finland, where this owl lives apparently, and warmer winters lead to reduced snow cover. If there's less snow cover, this is not as good camouflaging as this. So now the brown morph, the brown form, is more advantageous than the gray, so it has better survival. Let's do questions. Let's do some questions to make sure you got this right. So, what is the role of greenhouse gases in global warming? As always, I hope you've got the gist by now. I'm going to count down from 3, and you can pause now and think about it. But 3, 2, and 1. C. Why not A? So they do not block shortwave radiation from entering the Earth's atmosphere, not at all. The shortwave radiation can enter perfectly fine. They also don't reflect heat away from Earth's surface. That happens automatically when the rays hit the Earth. It's the opposite, actually. They do absorb it, and they re-emit the long-wave radiation back into the Earth. They also do not reduce evaporation and precipitation globally. Okay. Next thing, how does ocean stratification affect marine ecosystems? 3, 2, and 1. So it reduces nutrient mixing or upwelling, right? Lowering primary productivity. Remember, primary productivity is the photosynthesis that happens. If there's less upwelling, plants cannot undertake photosynthesis, so there's less primary productivity. It does not improve oxygenation of deep ocean layers. In fact, it's the opposite. There's less mixing. It does not increase upwelling. It decreases it, and it does not enhance the solubility of carbon dioxide in warm water. Okay. Next thing and last, what explains the increase in brown morphs of the tawny owl in Finland? Once again, 3, 2, and 1. So they're better adapted to reduced snow cover. We just went over this. All right. I hope that was clear. As always, I'm thrilled to answer any questions in the comments, and I'll see you next week for the last bio video for a while, which is going to be the specimen paper for theme D. See you next week.